Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by Dustin Koski. So be sure to show them some love in the comments as you deploy your likes. Subscribe and ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about some of the most important places in history. Let's get to it. For centuries, the eyes of the world seldom drifted to Yemen. At the base of the Arabian Peninsula, it's far from the heart of the Middle East conflicts. It also has a reputation for being one of the poorest countries in the world, if not the poorest. That changed dramatically in November 2023, when the Yemeni government declared a Red Sea blockade to stop the Gaza genocide, severing one of the most significant trade routes on Earth. In doing so, the nation was put directly in the sights of the most powerful militaries in the world. This came after it had endured years of blockade and bombardment by its overwhelmingly powerful neighbor to the north, Saudi Arabia. Why did the government of Yemen take such a drastic action? Was this a cynical ploy by the Houthi government to distract from the domestic problems while posturing as the saviors of Palestinians? An act performed out of hatred for Israel? A sincere desire to save the Palestinians? The influence of Iran? Whatever the truth, what's clear is that this recent Yemeni military action is part of a millennia-old history of the Yemeni population standing up to the most powerful militaries. Sometimes they triumph against long odds, other times they do not. As we'll see, the spirit remains regardless. Yemen is approximately 35 million people living in an area roughly 200,000 square miles, about one-third larger than the state of California. It shares the southernmost tip of the Arabian Peninsula with the nation of Oman, which is roughly half its size, with about 1/7 the population. The interior of Yemen is distinguished by the Sarawat mountain range in the west and the southernmost Rub' al Khali desert in the east. Yes, I know I'm pronouncing that last one wrong, but it's really hard, in my defense. The Rub' al Khali desert is not overwhelmingly huge, being the 5th largest in the world. The portion that runs through Yemen has the distinction of being the longest stretch of sand on Earth. Not that it's appreciated by the inhabitants, for that geographical Yemeni region is nicknamed the Empty Quarter. It should be said, all of that is what comprises Yemen on paper. In recent years, this situation has become much more complicated and far more fluid. We'll explain how later. As to be expected for a land within a few hundred miles of the cradle of civilization, Yemen's lands were settled early. Its current capital, Sana'a, is one of the oldest continually occupied cities in human history at 2,500 years of age. In contrast, its current associations with war and hardship, the rise of the original civilizations that formed the basis of the contemporary nation of Yemen, was fueled by perfumes. Specifically, an economic boom began circa 1000 BC with the wide adoption of camels for transporting various spices, aromatics, and the gold for which they were exchanged. Prominent among these was frankincense, which you might have heard about a certain Jesus Christ receiving on his birthday. The wealth accumulated through this trade made Yemen one of the wealthiest regions in the world for centuries. The port city of Aden was sufficiently prominent as a wealthy hub to be mentioned in the 3rd chapter of the book of Ezekiel. With the prosperity came wonders of, if not the world, then of the age, most notably the Marib Dam. Its span of 600 meters may sound modest today, but at the time it was a source of immense agricultural bounty. References to the title Queen of Sheba became a shorthand for great wealth, and remained so until well into the 20th century. For the Roman Empire, southern Arabia became known as Felix Arabia, Happy Arabia. You know, I was shocked to learn how much of my personal information was with data brokers, and with today's sponsor, Delete Me, I found out that 18 of these companies had my personal information. Data brokers are companies that snatch up your personal info and sell or rent that information for a nominal price. And it's not just social media websites. They get this information from all over the internet, including government public records. Now, I'm pretty careful when it comes to what I do and don't do online, but you know something? You can never be too careful. This information included my name, age, past addresses, family members, marital status, and my wife's name as well. And with Delete Me, I was able to get it removed from these websites. Now, full disclosure, you can absolutely do this on your own. But if you're like me and you don't have the several hours it would likely take to follow that process for every single website that has your information, Delete Me will help keep your data more secure by doing all of that for you. So now is the time to safeguard your online privacy. Get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/geographics and use promo code geographics at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/geographics, code geographics. By 25 BC, the kingdoms of southern Arabia were in a decadent phase, where they had either through economic hardship or negligent management allowed the iconic Marib Dam to collapse. To Caesar Augustus, with their ancestral trade wealth and Rome's recent military success conquering Egypt and the like, the future Yemenis surely looked like easy pickings. Thus, he ordered Aelius Gallus to invade southern Arabia with 10,000 troops and make it very un-Felix. Although the Romans were able to capture the outlying cities of Aska and Barakish en route to the capital, the future Yemeni hit upon the strategy that would defeat so many arrogant imperialists over the millennia. And that is, they let the harsh environment and strained supply lines do their work for them. Thus, the Romans and their allies were forced to withdraw from the capital. Even without a single big defeat in a pitched battle, their casualties were sufficiently severe that they never returned, leaving the Arabians to sit pretty with their trade routes to India and Africa, for a time. By the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire realized a cannier method to defeat Felix Arabian trade monopolies. They contacted the sources of Yemeni products directly and cut out the Arabian middleman. Consequently, southern Arabia fell into a decline which destabilized the region for centuries as claimant after claimant fought civil wars for the throne. When the first Muslim missionaries arrived in Yemen in 630 AD, the land was back under the control of rival tribes. From 522 to 530, a flamboyant figure named Yusuf Karib, nicknamed Du Nuwaz, essentially the one with the curls, ascended and attempted to turn the kingdom into a fundamentalist Jewish state. But his murderous zeal, he would execute people by the hundreds for refusing to convert, was disastrously counterproductive to the region's legitimacy in the region. The most powerful group to rise in the wake of all the chaos was, and I'm sorry if I butchered this pronunciation, the Banu Hamdan Confederation, and even their leaders were referred to as chiefs instead of kings. Nevertheless, Ali, the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad himself, was able to spread his cousin's religion through the region quickly. However, while Islam spread to every corner of Yemen quickly, it was deeply flawed as a uniting force. Even powerful caliphates such as the Umayyad, which reached into the heart of France, were not able to conquer all of Yemen. By 897, a unique sect of Islam called the Zaidi arrived and was most prevalent. Even though the Zaidi Caliphate collapsed by 911, Zaidi would remain a prominent sect of Shia Islam in Yemen, and only in Yemen. It would be roughly comparable to if Utah had remained a separate state wherein Mormonism was the most common religion. While Westerners generally believe that the largest rivalry in Islam is Sunnis versus Shias, this has not often been the case in Yemen. For centuries, it was sects of Shia warring for dominance. In northern Yemen, the Zaidis coalesced into an imamate, or a clerical order that took control of the region by 1047 AD. During this period, southern Yemen was taken over by the Rasulid dynasty, which had been descended from the Egyptian dynasties but cut ties in the early 1200s. This conflict would not only be sustained, but could lead to ghastly consequences. Half an entire sect, the Dawoodi, were essentially driven out of Yemen by 1591, with India being their primary destination. Those who remained in the sect and in Yemen, the Mustahil, remain a widely abused fringe group to this day. While these divisions kept the fighting spirit of Yemen alive, any group that's prone to infighting is also vulnerable to savvy outsiders. While the Rasulid dynasty was able to separate themselves from Egypt, by 1250 Egypt had a new leadership in the form of the Mamelukes, a dynasty derived largely from ascendant freed slaves. Mameluke is derived from an Arab word for slave, similar to the link between Slav and slave. The Mamelukes and Rasulid dynasty under Sultan al-Malik al-Mujahid vied for control of Mecca, having spent 20 years quelling rebellions in Yemen. The most memorable event of his reign took place in 1351, while the Sultan took his second pilgrimage to Mecca. While separated from his main escort group, the Sultan's retinue was attacked and the Sultan was captured when he offered himself in exchange for the safety of his companions. He spent 14 months in captivity in Cairo before his release. By all accounts, it had been a genial enough imprisonment, something only a monarch at the time could hope for. But it was characteristic of how the Mamelukes were able to assess their dominance over the Yemeni for more than a century. By 1538, the threat of the Mamelukes was replaced by the threat of the Ottoman Empire from Turkey. The Ottoman Empire declared sovereignty over the ports of Yemen, particularly the port city of Aden. To that end, a fleet of 90 ships was sent to conquer Yemen's ports, which fell to Ottoman control. However, northern Yemen Zaidi tribes were not so pliant, and nearly a century of rebellions ended with the Ottomans being thrown out in 1634, but not forever, as we'll see later. Concurrent with the arrival of the Ottoman threat was the arrival of the European threat. Indeed, the threat of Portuguese incursion into the Middle East was a primary pretext for the later Ottoman invasion of Yemen. In February 1513, 1,400 troops under Afonso de Albuquerque began a siege of the Yemeni city of Aden as a campaign to seize control of the Red Sea. It was not a very successful siege, for when Albuquerque launched the attack proper in August 1513, it only took a half a day of fighting for the Yemeni to force him to retreat. Having proved too much trouble to conquer militarily, the Portuguese and subsequent European arrivals began trading with Yemen instead. The timing couldn't have been better for Yemen, which had begun exporting a new cash crop, coffee, which was known in Arabic as kahwa, a condensed version of kahwat, or wine of the bean. Through close guarding of their production secrets, Yemen was able to caffeinate their economy for 200 years of monopoly. It was so significant that a prosperous trade city was named Mocha. A Dutch merchant named Peter van den Broek, or Swamp, started the end to Yemen's boom time in 1616 by smuggling out some coffee bushes. The process was delayed by Broek initially taking the plants to Amsterdam with its inhospitable climate. The plants were then taken to the Dutch East Indies, and with their monopoly broken, Yemen was put back on the road to poverty. To this day, Mocha remains a largely abandoned, obscure city in Yemen. By 1820, Great Britain had seized control of India and other huge colonies in Asia, and thus needed more bases for trade and supplying its Eastern Empire. One of their new targets became the Yemeni city of Aden, where they had initially set up a garrison in 1802 for their war against Napoleon in Egypt. The rest of the city fell to the invaders in 1839. Aden was given the ignominious duty of serving as a hub for coal shipments and received the nickname Coal Hole of the East, which sounds way dirtier than it actually is. Over the next few decades, the British Empire would attempt to take the rest of the country, but their offensive into northern Yemen would remain unsuccessful, leaving the nation divided. By 1888, the Crown switched strategies to buying more Yemeni territory. This less brutal form of conquest allowed for British rule of Yemen to extend deep into the 20th century, with one notable challenge along the way. The late 19th century saw the Ottoman Empire invading Yemen once more, with the Zaidi tribes led by Imam al-Mansur in the northern regions once again proving their most formidable foe in the venture. The Ottomans attempted a campaign to win the hearts and minds of the locals through paying to better the nation's infrastructure, but by 1904 they clearly lacked the funding to even supply their own military properly. One of the results was a famine, which spread popular discontent against the occupying army, while supposedly the Zaidi were receiving up-to-date weaponry from Iran, in a precursor of things to come. By 1905, the Ottoman forces under Feyzi Pasha had swelled to 110,000 troops pulled from every other corner of the empire, with the reinforcements under the commander of Riza Pasha. The Zaidi became experts at ambushing Ottoman columns, and reportedly many among the Ottomans defected, since, as Syrian conscripts, they saw more kindred spirits in the Yemeni rebels than with their oppressors. It was clear that the Ottoman military had suffered a devastating loss, 25,000 casualties. Ultimately, through a series of ceasefires and negotiations, the Ottomans only brought peace to the region in 1912, just before losing the First World War brought Ottoman power in the region to an end. With northern Yemen free of the Ottomans as of 1918 and under Yahya Mahmud al-Mutawakkil's control, the Zaidi almost immediately set their sights on freeing the south from British rule. Rather than charging straight down with guns blazing, Yahya's approach was through making legal claims of sovereignty in court while also sending Zaidi youth to Iraq to study modern military tactics and strategy, a long-term investment, and attempting to ensure unity among the Zaidi. With 1,400 tribes to keep happy, that was a tall order, so it was perhaps unsurprising the Zaidi had not wrested control of South Yemen from Britain by the 1940s. By 1948, due to discontent with Yahya's inactivity over his commitment to liberating the South, the Imam was assassinated in a coup. His son Ahmad overthrew the revolutionary government, but lacking popular legitimacy, spent most of his time trying to maintain his precarious rule through oppression. His methods only became more severe after an attempted assassination in 1955. In 1962, northern Yemen broke out into a civil war, and in 1963, one began in South Yemen. The northern Yemen government was supported by Saudi Arabia, while the revolutionaries were aided by Egypt, who were then joined by the USSR, bringing the NATO countries almost reflexively in support of the Yemeni Imam. The war would drag on until 1970, with such added hardships as drought. At the end of a long partisan campaign, the British had been thrown out of Aden in 1967. Egypt's military support collapsed as a result of losing the Arab-Israeli War of the same year, and the northern government forces were defeated. Indeed, the Imam went with the withdrawing British forces to Britain, where he remained for the rest of his life. A Republican government was put in place in North Yemen, with the compromise that members of the deposed Imam's administration were given high offices. In the 1970s, socialism became a force to be reckoned with in Yemen. In 1978, South Yemen became known as the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen, or the DPRY, and the ruling party was the Yemeni Socialist Party, or YSP. It attempted to foment a revolution in the Northern Yemen Arab Republic, or YAR, through supporting the Popular Front for Liberation. Although there were brief border conflicts between the DPRY and YAR, by May 22, 1990, the two countries finally united under the Saleh administration of the YAR. The unification was driven to a significant degree by the collapse of the USSR, convincing the YSP that joining their northern neighbors peacefully was the only viable option. Just when it looked like Yemen was in for stability, in August 1990, Yemen refused to join the military coalition to liberate Kuwait from Iraq, arguing that the influence of Western nations would not be conducive to the region. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker said of the decision that was the most expensive vote no they ever cast. The result was that Yemeni laborers were expelled from the United States, all economic ties with the superpower were suspended, and most of the Arab states joined the U.S. in shunning Yemen. An immediate economic depression ensued in Yemen, which spread immediate unrest and caused a civil war in 1995. The war allowed the YAR to consolidate even more power. Since then, Yemen has experienced varying degrees of poverty, which has been felt with particular severity by its female population. As recently as 2013, 12% of men and 41% of women are unemployed. 30% of women were married before the age of 18. And according to the CARE organization, this is to a huge degree because their families can't pay to feed the girls without assistance. It's a situation that would leave any nation vulnerable to the rise of extremism. When the Mujahideen won a campaign that forced the Soviet Union from Afghanistan in 1989 and hastened its subsequent collapse, in the process it radicalized many Muslim leaders, most famously Osama bin Laden. There were many among those radical ranks who would form a group that called themselves the Ansar Allah, or Defenders of God. With many Yemeni resentful of the US for collapsing their economy in the early 90s, continuing to exert influence on the Middle East and Africa through the late 90s, and then invading majority Muslim nations after the 9/11 attacks, this group gradually shifted their hatred of Soviet secularism to American society. When Yemeni President Ali Saleh supported America's 2003 invasion of Iraq, the tensions boiled over. Former parliamentary representative Hussein Badr al-Din al-Houthi became the central figure of a protest movement in 2004. That same year, he and 25 of his associates were killed in government crackdowns. Subsequently, the protest movement was popularly known after its central martyr, the Houthi rebels. In 2010, as part of a campaign against the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, President Barack Obama ordered the assassination of the scholar, jihadist, and U.S. citizen Anwar al-Awlaki. In 2011, the order was carried out through a drone strike without due process, along with his 16-year-old son Abdul Raham and other children, turning the strike into an international scandal. Thus, when the Middle East was rocked by the wave of revolutions called the Arab Spring, the Houthi rebels were able to gain considerable momentum, to the point Yemen was in full civil war by 2014. Famously backed by Iran, within a year the Houthi took over the presidential palace from President Saleh, and by 2017 the rebels took control of the capital and killed the president. Having supported Saleh's administration, Saudi Arabia began a massive bombing and raiding campaign in Yemen, along with the United States, with extremely ugly results. In January 2017, newly elected President Donald Trump ordered what became known as the Yakla raid, which killed 10 children under the age of 13. In August 2018, Saudi bombers destroyed a school bus near Dayan and killed 40 children aged 11 and younger. Additionally, Yemen was struck by famine as a result of Saudi blockades of Yemeni trade routes and strikes on agriculture. 50,000 Yemenis starved in 2017 alone. UNICEF reported in March 22 that 2.2 million children were malnourished. Despite all that, the Houthis maintained control of 2/3 of Yemen's population as of 2024. Thus, it's ambiguous whether they should be regarded as the legitimate government of Yemen. On October 7, 2023, 2,500 Hamas militants attacked the Israeli Defense Force and the Nova Music Festival and killed 1,200 people, taking 240 hostages. Despite being able to cite preceding events such as Operation Protective Edge killing 1,400 Gaza Palestinians, civilians, or the IDF shootings of roughly 10,000 people during the nonviolent March of Return protests, 1,800 of them children, Israel declared Hamas the aggressor and spent the subsequent months invading the Gaza Strip. The International Court of Criminal Justice would issue orders that Israel take measures to provide emergency aid to the region, which Human Rights Watch reported in February 2024 that the Israeli government ignored. On October 31, 2023, Houthi rebels effectively declared themselves the only military allies of the Palestinians and began to seize Israeli ships. They announced a full blockade of Israel from the Red Sea, which would entail stopping all ships bound for Israel by missile strike if necessary. They made good on that threat in the following months, such as striking the American vessel Gibraltar Eagle on January 15, 2024, and sinking the British oil tanker Ruby Mar in March 2024. Thus, thousands of ships, 15% of global shipping, were rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks onto shipping schedules among a host of other expenses. By March 2024, 40 ships had been attacked by the Houthis, and several were seized. As an inevitable result, NATO countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, launched Operation Prosperity Guardian, which effectively amounted to launching airstrikes on Yemen. On April 4, 2024, it was reported that 452 airstrikes were launched on Yemen, which killed 37 people. It was a sufficiently devastating blow that afterwards the Houthis announced they were expanding their attacks into the Mediterranean Sea and launched attacks on U.S. ships, including the destroyer the Mason, which is to say that the Houthi rebellion has not been brought to its knees by the collective military efforts of the United States and the United Kingdom, but neither has it stopped the IDF's invasion of Gaza. At the time of writing, Yemen or the Houthi rebellion remains the only government that has taken military action in support of Palestinians. Yemen's history of fighting the most powerful empires on Earth is older than most nations on Earth. It has enjoyed great extremes of wealth and endured terrible poverty. Enlightenment and extreme conservatism have held sway over its people. Through it all, a formidable fighting spirit has endured. Those who think they can dismiss Yemen's capacity as only a puppet of other nations do so at their peril. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a place we should cover next, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important places. And thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. Remember to follow the link in the description and pin comment to get 20% off your subscription. It's a small price to pay to help keep your private data safe from bad actors. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.